fellow panelists, and to our esteemed hosts and sponsors. Once again, thank you very much for an excellent event. It really is a huge honour to be here. Fintech is not a new thing. If you think of Visa and MasterCard as great examples of fintech companies, you think of ATMs, you think of lots of things. So fintech has been around a long time. We now see it as an industry, and hopefully I can explain some of the reasons why. And actually, when you really dig into it, and we heard some brilliant stuff about the blockchain earlier, we've talked about regulation. Not a lot has changed over the history of money. It's I will pay the bearer of, I have something that's of value, you have something of value, let's exchange those things on a fairish basis, and then intermediaries sit in the middle, and we all know how the ecosystem goes. But I love it when someone comes to me with a business plan and talks about the actual function as revolutionary, because there's very few new revolutionary functions, there's just different ways of doing it. But what, of course, has changed is this. It has amazed me over my last 20 years of the fintech journey when I sit with CEOs, certainly nowhere near as enlightened as the people in this region from the conversations, who still see this as a fad, as a phase, and they think about technology as an industry in its own right, as a vertical industry rather than an all-pervasive part of our existence. And of course, we saw from Greg earlier where this is going, and I don't want to scare anyone or get too deep, but singularity and human integration to technology is not something of the future, it's happening today. So if we think about the technology as the horizontal, and then we think about the verticals as industries like finance, like retail, you get this fusion point. We're talking a lot about collaboration today. And the fusion point is where the new standards are going to be set. You can't have fintech without fin, it's just tech. And you can't have fintech without tech, it's just fin. And as we see these new platforms being built and setting new standards for global citizens around the world, it's going to be because of this incredible revolution. And the Prime Minister of the UK made a good point at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. If you're a global tech giant and you have 1 billion customers, 15 million interacting with you on an hourly basis, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to those people to protect them, to keep them safe, to do the things that our banks do with their money. You can't just play around the edges. But we have to be aware of the fact that the 5 largest companies in the world by market cap are technology companies. These are network businesses. They understand that content follows eyeballs, not the other way around. So we have this enormous shift in society to a technology-enabled life, and our industry is asking itself some very searching questions about where we go. And anyone that thinks it's a new thing, and there are still people that say, oh, this fintech thing's appeared out of nowhere, just look at the statistics. In the UK alone, $75 trillion worth of payments going through the ecosystem. It's a very, very large industry. The one thing I would say, and people ask me, where's this perfect storm come from? Any one of these individual 4 would not be driving the change that we're seeing alone. It really is a perfect coming together of a number of things. And after 2008, when, certainly in our country, and again, I congratulate many of the banks here for being far more prudently run prior to that period. We've been to Australia recently, we've seen how well their banks have performed, we've been to Canada and seen the same thing, but in the UK, we had 2 banks that went under and the government had to bail them out. And our then Prime Minister, David Cameron, and I had a conversation in 2011 on the way to see Nelson Mandela for an incredible trip to South Africa. And he said, how do I talk about banking? How can I stand up after what happened in 2008 and talk about banking in any positive light? And yet it's 15% of our GDP and 37% of Europe's financial services industry. We're incredibly proud of it. We want to be the financial center of the world, but I can't talk about banking. So we had to move the conversation on to growth, to the future, to fintech. And we had to put some things in place, and we had to put them in place fast. Because otherwise we were going to lose our right to be a global financial center. And the point I made is banks are no longer worried about other banks. HSBC 15 years ago would have been saying, I want to see what Lloyds are doing, I want to see what Barclays are doing. Let me look at other banks around the world to learn. Now, it's just a set of piranhas taking tiny slivers from the bank and working out the ways to get in and get to the customer base without having to run the back end, the big stuff, without having to worry about the regulator. And one piranha is not a problem, but tens of thousands of piranhas does become a problem to the banks. And we've talked about collaboration or disruption, and we're going to talk about that a bit more in a second. And if you get in the mindset of the tech companies and the new age of companies, and these aren't fintechs, these aren't startups, guys, these are huge organizations. They don't think about banking as an industry. It's just another thing you do. They don't think about payments as an industry. It's just another thing you do. You chat, you do social media, you buy stuff, you bank, you pay. Their mindset is about customer first all the time. How do I give the customer what they want as easily as possible? Now, that's great news for the customer until such point as the money gets lost or a transaction drops, because this is not crazy frog ringtones, this is people's money. It's their ability to feed their family, and that's why we have to see fusion of banks, risk managers, security, with these great new front ends. So how do you create that environment? And when I was first honored to meet Sahil and start speaking to ABC Bank, I have to say, I didn't know enough about this region, and I certainly didn't know of the very innovative approach that the regulator had taken, the very open approach. And that's fantastic news, because that's what we had to do in the UK. And you're going to hear from our Envoy for FinTech, who's been one of the real driving forces behind much of this in a minute. But we had to find this perfect environment where we could bring together regulator, incumbent, innovators, all around the consumer. All around the consumer, because that is the role of government, that is the role of the regulator, to put the consumer first. And our FCA in the UK has a dual role, competition and protection, and that's good, because there's some carrot and there's some stick in there. So we started thinking about how we did that, and that led to what many of you know now as the Sandbox, Project Innovate, Open Banking, adopting PSD2, adopting GDPR, understanding these things, but in a right touch regulation way. Not too light touch, not too hard touch, right touch regulatory way. And the Sandbox so far has been a great success. There's more to do. We've talked about a global sandbox. But Project Innovate is very important because it's two things. It's a technology environment and it's a conversation. It's not just about technology, it's a dialogue. And having been a fintech entrepreneur, I know how hard it is to get 2 years down the pipeline. It happened to me, not in the UK, in another market, build the technology, be told it was all going to be fine, and then a regulatory change stops your business dead. You can't get to market, you've got to go back to your VCs, you've got to dilute your equity, you've got to get rid of some staff. Not a great moment. To be able to speak openly with the regulator and say, this is where we're thinking of going with our technology, what do you think, is a fantastic opportunity. And then joining these regulators up and starting to get some government to government, regulator to regulator conversations going on, instantly creates a bigger domestic market. Because if the regulator here is speaking with the regulator in the UK and the regulator in Australia, and I launch a service having gone through the sandbox in Bahrain, suddenly I've got a bigger domestic market to go after. So as an entrepreneur, I can write in my business plan, I've got 100 million people to go after, not a couple of million people, which changes the access to capital and starts to shift things in the right way. And so this has led to a strong, we would say the strongest, but we need all the friends we can get in the UK at the moment, in case you hadn't heard about our recent referendum. And so we're building, we're building bridges, but we are doing a nice job in fintech. There's a physical reason for that as well as a technical reason for that. This is our London Underground map. Some of you may have heard there's a big infrastructure project. I know, indeed, many people from this part of the world have invested in it, for which we're very grateful, called Crossrail. And Crossrail goes live early next year. And Crossrail, you'll be able to get from Canary Wharf on one side of London to Heathrow in 39 minutes on one train. And if you think about the opportunity for a fintech entrepreneur to start their day in Canary Wharf, meet with a whole set of global banks, meet with Innovate Finance, the trade body for fintech, have some conversations about partnering, 6 minutes later be in Liverpool Street in the old heart of the City of London, meet the London Stock Exchange, meet some of the historic banks, go and see Lloyds of London, insurance. One tube stop up the Northern Line, you can go to Shoreditch and to all of the creative centres, then down to Westminster to go through the innovation workshops with the regulator, perhaps via Battersea Power Station to see what Google and Apple are up to, and then head to Heathrow and go off and export your business in a day, 6-7 meetings. That gives us an amazingly unique opportunity to create this fusion factory for fintech. And it's so rare we get to, you're about to hear from an American, so I'm happy to say it. I gave a speech in the White House last year about the fact that, we've got this fusion, and the then Secretary of State for Commerce, Penny Pritzker, said, you guys are absolutely nailing it in the UK. And I said, every time an American compliments me, it means they're about to take the idea and scale it. The good news with this one is that Washington sees New York as Fin, 17 regulators looking at it, constraining it, controlling it, and it sees the Valley as tech, and never the twain shall meet. So it gives us an interesting opportunity. Last point from me, because I've used my time. Isn't it great, and Bahrain is going right on the center of this list now from this trip, isn't it great that we're also seeing this collaboration? Isn't it fantastic that, when I started my fintech business in 2002, only 2 billion people on the planet had a bank account. 2 billion people, and yet 7 billion people had access to mobile phones and SIM cards. Now, those numbers are changing quickly, but the fact that we can build global standards with the last mile already taken care of through technology is super inspiring. And I've been really inspired by my conversations with ABC Bank when they talk about trust as an asset. If you're going to launch a new service or a new neobank or partner with somebody, why isn't it that your ABC brand isn't just the brand of trust? We have a responsibility, a regulated responsibility to look after your money. We don't mind if we're the supermarket shelves and someone else puts products on it, but it's got our trust behind it. And my favorite quote from Warren Buffett, if past history was all there was to success, librarians would all be billionaires. It is time to embrace this shift we're feeling and to collaborate more and more and always be putting the consumer first. And I think Bahrain, particularly from this trip, has an opportunity to be a bit of a lighthouse in the region. You just have to do it in the digital world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alastair.